Most people give up when they fall, but what if that's exactly when your victory begins? Have you ever felt like no matter how hard you try, the past always finds a way to pull you back? What if I told you that sometimes you have to fall in order to rise? This is the story of Ethan, a man who thought he had lost everything until a simple dream changed the course of his life. What he discovered might just transform your journey too. The dirt road stretched out in front of Ethan like a long sigh. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple, but he barely noticed. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself wanted to hold him back. A worn-out backpack swung from his shoulders, carrying little more than a change of clothes and an old notebook. Ethan had learned the hard way. Bad choices don't just disappear. They follow you like stubborn shadows. He couldn't quite recall when things started falling apart. Maybe it was with the first lie, something small, a favor not returned, a debt left unpaid. But lies are like seeds. Small at first, but their roots grow deep. Now, he was running, not from someone specific, but from everything. From broken promises, destroyed friendships, and most of all, from himself. That morning, he left the city for the last time without looking back. His brother's voice still echoed in his head. "You never change, Ethan. You're nothing but a liar." He didn't argue. The truth was, he didn't know who he was anymore. The night settled in and the cold wind brushed against his face. Ethan stepped off the road, found a patch of tall grass, and lay down, using his backpack as a pillow. Staring at the starry sky, he wondered if God still cared. If he ever did. "If I had one more chance, just one more," he whispered, not expecting an answer. But that night, under that quiet sky, something began to shift. The rustling of the grass in the wind was the only sound that broke the silence of the night. Ethan stared at the stars, but his mind was far away. Loneliness, which felt manageable during the day, turned into something unbearable at night. He never liked being alone. Maybe that's why he surrounded himself with distractions for so long. The wrong friends, meaningless parties, empty promises. Now there was no one. The vastness of the starry sky made him feel small, almost invisible. He wondered if anyone, anywhere, was looking at the same stars. Maybe someone else who was lost, like him. Maybe someone who had already found their way back. The cold wind blew across the field, and Ethan instinctively pulled his jacket tighter around his body. He was exhausted, but sleep refused to come. Shadows from his past danced through his mind. He remembered cheating his best friend in a shady deal. Ethan took the money and disappeared. He recalled the look on his mother's face the last time she begged him to stay. "You have a purpose, Ethan. God hasn't given up on you." But he had given up on her, on everyone. A tear rolled down his cheek, unexpectedly warm. Ethan quickly wiped it away, embarrassed by his own weakness. "Why would I do that? I'm not that kind of guy," he muttered, frustrated. But then, as if the words left his mouth on their own, he whispered a prayer. "God, if you still care, I just need one more chance." It felt strange. He hadn't prayed since he was a child. The sensation was uncomfortable, but somehow right, like an old pair of shoes forgotten in the back of a closet that still fit perfectly after all those years. The night passed quietly, but Ethan fell asleep with a new feeling, somewhere between fear and hope. The darkness of the field faded into a soft, golden light. Ethan didn't know when sleep had taken him, but suddenly he was somewhere else. In front of him stood a massive ladder, stretching from the ground up into the sky. The steps shimmered as if made of polished gold, and angels moved up and down effortlessly. Their robes glowed with a soft brilliance, and the entire place felt wrapped in a peace he couldn't describe. Ethan looked down at his hands. They were rough and dirty. He felt small standing there, but he couldn't look away. Then a voice echoed from the top of the ladder. "Ethan." His heart stopped for a moment. The voice was calm, firm, but full of grace. "I am with you. I never left you." Ethan tried to respond, but no words came out. He simply stood there, trembling. "Climb, Ethan. There is a purpose for you." With hesitation, he took the first step. As his foot touched the ladder, a wave of warmth rushed over him. Each step felt lighter. The guilt, the fear, the exhaustion, all seemed to fade. Before he could reach the top, the light grew brighter, surrounding him completely. Ethan woke with a jolt, sitting up in the damp grass. The stars still shone above him, but something inside had shifted. The dream felt so real he could still hear the echo of that voice. He looked toward the horizon and for the first time in a long while, smiled. Maybe I'm not so alone after all. The feeling of renewal was undeniable. Whatever lay ahead, he knew something new had begun that night. The morning sun crept slowly over the horizon, painting the field in soft hues of gold. Ethan sat up, feeling the cold dew on his clothes. The dream still echoed in his mind like a distant bell that wouldn't stop ringing. As he packed his few belongings, one question haunted him. Now what? Ethan looked down the road ahead. For a brief moment, he thought about returning to the city. But deep down, he knew if he went back, everything would unravel. The same traps, the same excuses. Something inside him wanted more. Hours later, he spotted a small farm in the distance. A wooden fence lined the fields, and crops stretched out beneath the warm sun. In the middle of it all, an older man, his gray hair tucked beneath a worn-out hat, worked the soil with an old-fashioned plow. Ethan hesitated, watching from afar. He didn't know why, but he felt drawn to help. "Good morning," Ethan called, slowly approaching the man. "Could you use an extra pair of hands?" The older man wiped his brow, glancing at him with narrowed eyes. "Might, but I can't pay much." Ethan shrugged. "I'm not looking for money, just a place to stay for a while." The man arched a brow, clearly skeptical, but after a moment he nodded. "If you work hard, you can stay. There's an old barn in the back." And just like that, Ethan began the slow process of change. Day by day, something inside him grew. It was strange. Physical labor had never been his strength. Yet with every seed planted, he felt like he was rebuilding something invisible but important. At night, sitting alone by the barn's dim lantern light, Ethan opened the tattered notebook he carried. For the first time in years, he wrote, "Today, I worked the land for the first time. Maybe I'm not so afraid of what comes next." Each page felt like a step further up the unseen ladder. The days on the farm turned into weeks. The simple routine brought Ethan a peace he hadn't felt in years. But he knew that real change never comes without a test. One afternoon, as Ethan stacked hay near the fence, he heard footsteps on the dirt road. The sound was familiar. He glanced up and saw someone approaching. It was Daniel. The same Daniel he had betrayed months ago, the friend who had trusted him and whom Ethan had deceived. Daniel's eyes were heavy as he stopped near the fence, arms crossed. "I thought you disappeared for good." Daniel's voice was flat, emotionless. Ethan dropped the hay, wiping his hands on his jeans. His first instinct was to run, but something kept him rooted in place. "I probably should have." Ethan stared at the ground. "I'm sorry." Daniel gave a short, dry laugh. "Sorry? You think that fixes it? You took everything I had." Ethan nodded slowly. "I know, and I can't undo it, but I'm trying to be someone different." Daniel studied Ethan's face, searching for lies. The silence hung between them for a long minute, broken only by the rustling wind. "Maybe you'll change, Ethan, but I'm not ready to trust you again." Daniel turned and walked away, leaving Ethan alone by the fence. The pain of losing someone because of his own actions was sharp. Yet, somehow, Ethan knew this was another step forward. That night, back in the barn, Ethan wrote, "Today, I lost a friend, but maybe one day I can rebuild what was broken. I won't stop here." The encounter with Daniel lingered in Ethan's mind for days. It was like a thorn he couldn't remove, small but impossible to ignore. Still, he kept working. Mr. Morgan, the farmer, began trusting Ethan more, letting him manage parts of the harvest. Ethan felt like, for the first time, he was building something real. But life, like the land, has its storms. One morning, dark clouds rolled in faster than anyone expected. The sky tore open, unleashing a heavy rain that flooded the fields. Ethan and the others rushed to save what they could, but by the time the storm passed, much of the crop was destroyed. "This will cost us months of work," Mr. Morgan murmured, staring out over the waterlogged fields. Ethan felt guilt pressed down on his chest. "I think this is my fault. Ever since I came here, things seem to keep going wrong." Morgan frowned, shaking his head. Nonsense, boy. Life is full of storms. This isn't about you. But Ethan wasn't convinced. The old habit of blaming himself returned, creeping in like a shadow. That night, he sat alone in the barn, listening to the rain pattering against the roof. Maybe I haven't changed as much as I thought, he whispered. Then he remembered the ladder from his dream. The voice echoed softly in his mind. I am with you. I will not leave you until I fulfill what I promised. Ethan took a deep breath. He realized that transformation isn't about avoiding failure. It's about rising again after falling. The next morning, Ethan was the first to return to the fields, helping Mr. Morgan replant and restore what had been damaged. Each handful of soil felt like a small victory over the voice that told him he wasn't good enough. That night, Ethan wrote, "Today the storm hit us hard, but I stayed, and that in itself feels like a miracle." The sun was high when Mr. Morgan called Ethan up to the farmhouse porch. The old farmer leaned against the railing, gazing out over the fields. Despite the storm, the crops were growing back. "You've worked hard, Ethan." Morgan's voice was thoughtful, as if weighing each word. "I see it, and so do the others." Ethan stood quietly, leaning against the fence. "I just did what needed to be done." Morgan glanced at him with a faint smile. "No, you did more than that." The wind brushed through the fields, rustling the crops as they swayed in the late afternoon light. "I'm retiring," Mr. Morgan said after a long pause. "And I want you to stay. Take care of this place. The farm needs someone who doesn't give up." Ethan blinked, stunned. I don't know what to say." Morgan chuckled softly. "Say yes." For a moment, Ethan saw the ladder from his dream flash in his mind. He hadn't reached the top, but step by step, he felt closer. "Yes." Ethan smiled, his voice steady. That night, Ethan sat by the lantern in the barn. His notebook was nearly full, each page a marker of his climb. "Today, I was given more than I expected. Life doesn't always give us what we want, but it gives us what we need. Maybe I'm not as far from who I was meant to be." The barn, once cold and unfamiliar, now felt like home. Ethan sat quietly, watching the last flickers of lantern light dance across the wooden walls. Peace didn't come from the farm or the work, it came from within. The next morning, as Ethan walked along the fence line, the wind carried the familiar sound of footsteps on the dirt road. It was Daniel. Ethan's heart skipped, but this time, he didn't feel the need to run. Daniel stopped at the fence, his hands tucked into his jacket pockets. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I heard you're taking care of this place now." Daniel's voice was softer than before. Ethan nodded, resting his arms on the fence. "Somehow, yeah." Daniel kicked at a loose stone in the dirt. "Listen, I haven't forgotten what happened, but maybe we can start over." Ethan's eyes met his, searching for any sign of resentment, but all he saw was the same thing he felt inside: hope. "I'd like that." Forgiveness didn't erase the past, but it built a bridge to the future. As Daniel walked away, Ethan stayed by the fence, gazing at the horizon. His journey wasn't over. There would be more struggles, but now he knew that each day, each step was another part of the climb. That evening, Ethan opened his notebook and wrote, "Victory isn't a destination, it's a journey. Every day is another step, and I'm ready to keep climbing." The ladder was still there, invisible but real. Ethan's story is proof that the journey of change isn't easy, but it's worth it. Every mistake, every step back is an opportunity to climb higher. Now, I want to ask you, what's holding you back from taking your next step? Is it fear, regret, or the belief that it's too late? Remember, every day is a chance to begin again. Like Ethan, you can choose to rise no matter how far you've fallen. So, what will you do differently starting today? Subscribe and join a community of people climbing higher every day. Here, every story is another step to help you grow and move forward. Let's keep climbing together.